Good evening, I'm Enrico Gruen, and tonight on Second Nature, the muskox. Could it be a source of food?
Through the mists of time, there is a story, a myth, handed down from generation to generation. A legend of a great warrior who lived in a mighty palace where he read comics and science fiction and became very wise. But the world was ravaged by plagues and war, and so the great warrior embarked upon an odyssey. He built himself a winged chariot of fire, and armed with as many comics and books as he could carry, he soared upward to live in the heavens with the gods, or, failing that, find somewhere clean and affordable. As he arose to the heavens, the gods grew angry at his arrogance, and they placed a great beast in his way, and the warrior was carried forward and swallowed whole into the monster, where he was doomed to live inside the beast for the rest of his days. And they say, if you listen at night to a certain channel, you can hear his voice still. And the warrior still speaks with great wisdom, and the people bow before him. Oh, hi! Greetings, prisoners of gravity. This is Commander Rick, legend in his own mind. I was tapping into signals from around the world, voices in a dozen languages from 100 cities, and I made an important discovery. At any moment, at any hour, some station somewhere is rerunning an episode of Star Trek. Today I watched 9 episodes in a row, 6.5 orbits worth. I noticed all the aliens had based their cultures on Earth's history. Gangsters, Nazis, gladiators, the Cold War, and even the Greek gods. A reality based on one of our myths. And I began thinking about myths in science fiction, like reincarnation and time travel, great odysseys, shrinking and expanding. The connections to myths is even stronger in fantasy fiction. For example, fantasy writers like Charles de Lint take creatures from fairy tales and legends and then set them free in the modern urban environment. Charles, it's Commander Rick. You draw upon myths and legends, but you don't arbitrarily Shanghai Odin and plunk them down at the corner of Spark Street and Bank.
I think you should be very careful with mythological material, folkloric material. There's a reason why it's gone handed down and lasted as long as it has. So I don't think there's anything wrong with twisting it around and playing with it, but it should be obvious through the subtext of the story or something why you've used that name.
For me, too many of the names in fantasy stories have this hollow ring to them, just syllables cobbled together, the way they arbitrarily name computer companies, you know, like Techdyne or Mega SimCorp or Data Matrix International.
Yeah, what bothers me when I was saying, but misname things, what's even worse than people giving just sort of any kind of old name to a piece is the people who use slightly what they feel is obscure real mythological names and utilize it for their work, which is fine if there's a reason for it. Like, you know, if you're going to call your character Rhiannon, that's great, but have a reason for it. Have that fit back, you know, so that the people who know actually will get a deeper resonance from the name, and from when they finish the book or the story, they'll go, yes, of course, that's why they named it. It really worked. But so when I'm reading it and I come across that kind of a character's name, and I don't get that, it's just an arbitrary name that they picked because it was neat. You know, I mean, I'm even more irritated with that book. Because if he can't bother to get that correct, then I feel cheated. I feel, well, you know, he's that little respect for me as it is, as you know, as a reader, that he's not going to even bother to research stuff or get things correct. You know, what else is he just sort of, you know, slagging off on me?
Exactly. Thanks, Charles. Now, one writer who has successfully updated a classic myth is Robert Sawyer. His book, Golden Fleece, a future space odyssey with echoes of Jason and the Argonauts. Jason is a computer, the Golden Fleece is a generation starship carrying interstellar immigrants, and as for the Argonauts, they still haven't won the Grey Cup. Robert, it's Commander Rick. Why have you chosen to invoke Greek mythology in Golden Fleece?
Well, I almost think that Greek mythology invoked me. I studied Greek mythology, and I'm fascinated by it. They knew exactly what the elements were that made for a powerful story. And I started toying around with the idea of writing a story about a computer, and the first thing that occurred to me was that in Greek tragedy and a Greek drama, there's this convention that we don't have anymore. It's called the chorus, a group of performers on stage who make snide or witty or questioning comments about the action that's going on. It was almost a verbal laugh track for plays that were performed in ancient Greece.
I think that's Alf, isn't it?
Alf, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
It's the observer who's asking the questions that either the audience wants to ask for itself, or, you know, in a more Machiavellian sense, what the writer hopes the audience would want to ask. So I thought, well, this is neat. And, you know, a computer, in a society in which computers are the norm, that can watch and see and comment on everything is essentially the Greek chorus brought into the present day.
You've also borrowed other elements from the Greek myths, like the idea of the Achilles heel.
One thing that's extremely common in Greek mythology is ponderous destiny. The fact that some people are stuck from day one. There's no way they can get out of who they are and what that means to the universe. They are going to follow a path in life that no matter how hard they try to avoid their predestination is inevitably going to lead to the same tragic end. And what I did with Golden Fleece, I don't want to give away how it ends, but there's a fatal flaw in all the computers that are controlling everything that happens on Earth in Golden Fleece. And it's inherent in their basic makeup, and they become aware of this fatal flaw, just as characters in Greek tragedy always become aware through a prophet or a blind seer, or somebody will say, hey, look, you're in deep trouble. This is going to happen to you. This is what the omens say. And some modern readers of the novel have had a little bit of trouble with this. They say, well, I don't get it. I don't understand why once they realized the problem, they couldn't do something about it. That's as much a myth as the Greek myths. We believe that once you recognize a problem, therefore you're halfway to the solution.
Thanks, Robert. Golden Fleece is clear about its mythical influences. Other science fiction stories are less obvious. I mean, are aliens just modern minotaurs and medusas? Are suspended animation stories just updates of Rip Van Winkle? An obvious example of mythology in comics is Marvel's mighty Thor. Thor was the son of Odin, the Norse god of war and poetry and wisdom, and Thor himself was the god of farming, rain, and with his hefty hammer, thunder. Walt Simonson wrote and drew a classic Thor run from November of '83 to September of '87. Walt really emphasized Thor's Norse roots and even introduced some of the other Norse gods into the comic. My friend Control just talked to Walt at a comic convention, and he asked him if he discovered any great truths while researching the legends of Thor.
Well, I don't know that I didn't become an Odinist by reading this stuff, although I got letters from Odinists while I was doing the book. But I think a lot of the truths in that stuff, it's the truths you find in any great literature. Hang on a second, Kelly, you're going to have to wait, sugar. What do you need?
Sorry, it gets kind of hectic at these comic conventions. Let me just skip ahead here.
I was a Norse legend fan when I was young. I had a big interest in mythology. So when I had a chance to do Thor, I found when I read it, I had read as a reader, I really liked a lot of the mythological underpinnings. I also liked the kind of the conflict as the mythology and the science fiction. I thought it was a nice conflict. But they hadn't really done the myths for a long time, much in Thor. And I really felt that the mythology was what set Thor apart from other superheroes. It gave him a background that wasn't the same as the Fantastic Four or the Avengers or anybody else. And so that was really the direction I pursued.
The comic book Thor was created in 1962, but superheroes really started in 1940 with Superman, Batman, and Captain America. And now these guys have sort of become legends themselves. Chris, why did superheroes catch on so dramatically?
We don't have a mythology of our own. Britain, Europe, Africa, Asia, everywhere in between have thousands of years of history, of culture, of mythos to build upon. Hero legends, god legends, all these stories that sort of give shape and meaning and context to the history of the people. We don't have that. We all came off the boat. We brought our histories with us in a sense, but there's nothing that's native to this land until you start getting Kit Carson and Davy Crockett and Paul Bunyan and things like that. And I think superheroes are a modern extension of that. They are something unique to us. Superman is the ultimate immigrant story. Guy comes from a faraway place, settles in America, makes a career, makes good, goes on from there.